Hello, sleepy dreamer. How you doing? Tonight I'll be your guide, here to ease you into calm, restful sleep. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future scary bedtime stories. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Also, let me know if there's a story you'd love to hear next. I was 17 when I landed my first legitimate job. Before that, I'd picked up babysitting work, lent a hand to my uncle in his workshop a couple of weekends, and manned the concession stand during my high school's football games. But this was the first job where I had to fill out tax forms, wear a uniform, and clock in like a real employee. The place was Milligan's Bread and Deli, a small family-run bakery tucked into the corner of a plaza in my hometown of Fairview, Indiana. It wasn't glamorous by any means, but to me it felt important. They had a reputation for their sourdough, sticky cinnamon rolls, and a line of subs that pulled in the lunch crowd every day. For me, it meant reliable paychecks, a sense of independence, and the chance to put something aside for community college. My mom was thrilled I found work nearby. My dad, on the other hand, just worried I'd struggle to juggle school and a job. I promised him I'd manage. When I started, fewer than 15 people worked there, divided across morning, afternoon, and night shifts. That small number made it easy for everyone to become familiar with each other quickly. Some were bakers, some cashiers like me, and then there was the delivery guy, Richard Malone. Richard was in his early 50s, though time had weathered him more. His beard carried streaks of gray, his skin was sun-creased, and his posture had a permanent stoop from years of hauling heavy boxes. From the very first day, he paid me the kind of attention that made my stomach churn. At first, I tried brushing it off. Maybe he was simply being welcoming. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, even then, I sensed something was wrong. I remember my very first shift. I was behind the counter, nervously fumbling with the register, when Richard entered through the back door. He was carrying 2 empty bread crates, his shirt streaked with flour and sweat. Well, he said, eyes locking onto me immediately. New face here. Yeah. First day, I answered, forcing a small smile. He set the crates down and stepped closer than necessary, leaning on the counter. Name? Ely, I told him. Pretty name, he replied instantly, his lips curling into a grin that wasn't exactly friendly. I'm Richard, delivery guy. You'll be seeing a lot of me. I nodded, wishing he'd give me space. From then on, every time he spotted me, he behaved as though I was the only thing in the room worth noticing. He lingered when others left. He made jokes meant only for me, and he pried into personal details no coworker should. Got a boyfriend. Emily? What do you do after work? You go to parties, right? Bet you're into music. What bands you like? I kept my answers short and polite. The truth was, my life was mostly split between classes and shifts. My circle of friends was small, and most were focused on applying to universities while I was just trying to hold steady. Still, I refused to give Richard anything more than I had to. The way his gaze lingered too long, like he was filing away details, unsettled me. Richard wasn't lazy, not by any means. Quite the opposite. He was always early, handled deliveries on his own, and never turned down extra shifts. The owners, 2 sisters named Patricia and Denise, admired him for it. Whenever someone mentioned his odd habits, they brushed it off. That's just Richard, they'd say. Harmless. But harmless wasn't the word I'd use. It started small. When I was mixing Rice Krispie treats in the back, he'd wander over and ask if he could lick the bowl like a kid. If I reached for supplies on a shelf, he'd suddenly appear in front of it, making me squeeze by, his arm brushing mine as he smirked. If I tried to distance myself, he always found some excuse to hang around until I returned. He was never openly aggressive. He hid it under chatter, under quirks others thought were innocent. But to me, it was suffocating, a constant pressure that wouldn't let up. The first real red flag came 2 months in. I was stocking the pastry case when Richard walked in holding an envelope. Got something for you, he said. I looked around, praying someone else was nearby. No one was. What is it? I asked. He slid the envelope over. Inside were 2 front-row tickets to a band I loved, Silver Dusk. My heart leapt. I wanted to go badly, but I knew it was wrong. Thanks, but I can't, I said quickly. Why not? His face darkened slightly. I'm not allowed to go out with coworkers, I lied. Richard leaned in closer. You don't even have to tell anyone. Just you and me. I'll drive. I'll get you home safe. It'll be fun. I shook my head firmly. No, sorry. His grin faltered before he forced it back. All right, suit yourself. Guess I'll find someone else. But I knew he wouldn't let it go. On my 18th birthday, he escalated. He brought a wrapped gift, slipped it to me in the middle of a rush. "Open it later," he whispered. At home, I tore the paper off and froze. It was a t-shirt, 2 sizes too small, chosen deliberately. Inside was a note in sloppy handwriting. "Put it on and send me a pic. Bet you'll look amazing." His phone number was scrawled at the bottom. I threw it away immediately, hands trembling. The next day, he asked if I got his gift. "Yeah, thanks," I muttered. "You try it on? You should text me when you do." "I don't have your number," I lied. "I gave it to you," he pressed. I stared him down. "I don't have it anymore." His jaw tightened, then he forced a laugh. "All right, no worries." But from then, his tone sharpened. Richard grew bolder. He asked for hugs on his birthday. He stood too close in the break room. Once, he even lifted his shirt to show me a scar across his stomach, holding it far longer than necessary while I tried to look away. I finally told Patricia, "He's making me uncomfortable." She chuckled. "That's just Richard being Richard. Don't take it so seriously." But it wasn't harmless. One night, leaving the shop, he cornered me in the lot. "You really should let me take you out sometime," he said. My grip tightened around my car keys, throat dry. "I'm not interested, Richard. You don't gotta be nervous. I'd treat you right." I shoved my car door open, slammed it shut, and drove off. That night, I couldn't stop thinking he might be behind me. Months dragged on. I got better at avoiding him, though it drained me. Sometimes I thought of quitting, but the money kept me there. Then one morning, I noticed his name missing from the schedule. Denise called me into the office. "Ely, I need you to know Richard won't be working here anymore." I tried to keep neutral, but relief washed over me. "What happened?" I asked. Her expression was heavy. "We found out he lied. He has a criminal record. He never told us. Someone tipped us off. When we checked, it was serious." My stomach dropped. "What kind of record?" She hesitated. "He's a registered sex offender, convicted in the 90s for abducting a minor. Other charges too. We didn't know. We never ran a background check." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The tickets, the shirt, the comments, the way he lingered. Suddenly, they all sharpened into something much darker. "Is he gone?" I asked. "We fired him, but he didn't take it well. When he showed up after, he had a weapon. We had to call the police. They hauled him off in cuffs." My knees felt weak. If I'd ever said yes, gone to a concert, what could have happened? I kept working at Milligan's for another year, but the air never felt the same. Each time the bell above the door rang, my chest clenched, half expecting him to return. I started carrying pepper spray. I memorized license plates in the lot. Even years later, I think about him, not out of longing, but because I realize how narrowly I escaped being a headline. One yes instead of no, and everything could have ended differently. I never saw him again, after that day. I don't want to, but every time I pass that old plaza, I still feel the weight of his stare. And I know deep down, if he'd gotten the chance, he would have taken everything from me. I was 17 when I landed my first real job at a fast food joint called Grill Shack. It wasn't glamorous, not even a little. But at that age, all I cared about was finally having money that was mine. My parents were always strapped, and I hated constantly asking them for cash just to go out with friends or buy a new shirt. The job could be overwhelming, especially during the evening rush, when the line stretched to the door and the fryers hissed endlessly. Yet there was something oddly steady about the routine. My grill shack sat in Fairhaven, a small town just outside of Milwaukee. It was in a rundown plaza across from a 24-hour convenience store and a pawn shop. Even from the sidewalk, the smell of grease clung to the place. The uniform was stiff black slacks, a bright polo stitched with the logo over the chest, and a visor that never felt right on my head. Still, it felt like a step toward independence. During my first few weeks, I mostly kept to myself. I was quiet, determined to learn the register and avoid messing up people's orders. Eventually, I started opening up to the others. Most were high school kids like me or a few years older. Some had dropped out of college, others were working until something better came around. That's when I met Marcus. He was maybe 20 or 21. Not tall, but he carried himself like he was, standing square, his presence louder than his actual voice. He had sharp features, tattoos snaking up his arms, and dark hair that was always slightly too long for restaurant standards. The first real conversation we had was in the break room when I was eating chips from the vending machine. "You're new, right, Claire?" he asked, leaning against the wall like he owned it. "Yeah," I said, brushing crumbs from my lap. "Couple weeks," he smirked. "Don't worry, you'll hate it soon enough." Something about how he said it made me laugh, and after that we spoke more. He had this way of making boring shifts tolerable. He muttered sarcastic things about customers under his breath, or rattled off entire horror movie monologues by memory. His humor was sharp, dark, the kind that either made people laugh uncomfortably or walk away. I wasn't used to someone like him noticing me. At school, I wasn't invisible, but I wasn't the girl anyone went out of their way to pay attention to either. Marcus did, and that meant something. Before long, we began hanging out outside of work. Since I was 17, he couldn't take me to bars. So instead, most nights we just drove around in his beat-up Honda, windows down, cigarettes burning, or we sat in his small apartment playing video games and talking about everything: music, family, even death. His place was cramped, a single bedroom with peeling linoleum and the smell of stale smoke, but to me it felt like freedom compared to my parents' house. At first, Marcus seemed like another guy who hid his rough past behind jokes, but the more time I spent with him, the more I noticed the cracks. Sometimes the things he said weren't really jokes. One night after a long Saturday shift, we were on his couch, the TV droning some late-night commercial in the background. Marcus leaned back, exhaling smoke, and said, "You ever think about how easy it'd be to kill someone and not get caught?" I froze mid-sip of my soda, waiting for the punchline. He glanced at me with a half-smile. "It's just about opportunity," he went on like he was explaining how to change a tire. "No cameras, no witnesses, quick and clean." I gave a nervous laugh. "Okay, Dexter, relax." His grin widened. "What? I'm serious." It unsettled me, but I told myself it was just his twisted sense of humor. I even laughed along after all. Didn't I joke about zombies or disasters? Things that would make my mom faint if she heard me. Who was I to judge? Still, something in his eyes lingered. He didn't look like he was joking. He looked eager. Over time, more warning signs surfaced. The way he talked about people he didn't like, customers, managers, even our coworkers, wasn't just frustration. He described hurting them in disturbingly vivid ways. After one customer snapped at him about cold fries, he whispered to me, "Some people don't deserve to breathe." He laughed after, but his voice carried an edge that wasn't funny. And there was his temper. I never saw him hit anyone, but his fists clenched hard, jaw twitching, holes left in the break room walls from punches. I told myself it wasn't my problem. He wasn't like that with me. He treated me as his closest friend. But truthfully, I didn't know him at all. The night everything changed began like any other. A Thursday evening in late fall, the air cold enough that our breath hung in the street. After our shift, Marcus suggested a bar he liked on the edge of town. "I can't. I'm not 21 yet," I reminded him. "Doesn't matter," he said with his cocky grin. "I know the guy at the door, he owes me." I hesitated, but the thought of someplace new, somewhere that felt adult, was too tempting. I went. The bar was a dive called the Iron Tap. Dim lighting, sticky floors, a jukebox rattling out old rock songs. His friends were already there, scruffy guys in their mid-20s who welcomed me instantly, handing me a beer. No one cared how young I was. At first it was fun, joking, laughing, drinking, until I felt lightheaded. But when his friends left, things shifted. Marcus leaned across the sticky table, voice low, eyes burning. "You know, sometimes I just want to do it. Like really do it." "Do what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Kill someone." I laughed weakly. "You're drunk." He shook his head, smiling wider, but his eyes were sharp, serious. "I've thought it through. I know exactly how I'd do it, who I'd choose. It'd be so easy." A chill moved through me. "Marcus, stop. That's not funny." "I'm not kidding," he said flatly. "One day you'll see." I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to draw attention, so I forced a laugh, changed the subject, and we left. Walking through Fairhaven's empty streets, his words replayed in my head. He pointed at a man waiting alone at a bus stop. "See that guy? Wouldn't even fight back. One stab, that's all." "Shut up," I snapped. He smirked and stayed quiet. We walked until another man approached from the opposite side. Maybe mid-30s, thin, glasses, dressed like he'd come from an office. Marcus shouldered into him deliberately. "Watch it," the man muttered. "What did you say?" Marcus's tone dropped. "Dangerous." The man tried to sidestep, but Marcus shoved him. I rushed forward. He didn't mean anything. But Marcus's face twisted, and in one fast motion, he pulled a knife. "Marcus," I screamed. The man froze, eyes wide, then reached into his jacket and pulled a handgun. The shot cracked through the empty street. Marcus staggered, clutching his side before collapsing. My chest seized. The man shook, gun still pointed, his face pale. He wasn't some criminal. He looked terrified. I fumbled my phone, Called 911, voice shaking. The man didn't run. He just stood muttering. He had a knife. He had a knife. Within minutes, sirens filled the night. Police swarmed. Medics lifted Marcus onto a stretcher. He was still conscious, groaning, blood soaking his shirt. I told the truth. Marcus started it. He pulled the knife. I wouldn't lie for him. They released the man. It was clearly self-defense. Marcus survived, but he never forgave me. From the hospital, he texted once, "You betrayed me." I blocked him and never saw him again. Looking back, I should have known. The signs were there, hidden behind his jokes and his smirk. I just refused to see them. Now sometimes when I walk alone at night, I remember how he looked at me across that table, eyes burning, whispering, "One day you'll see." I wonder what might have happened if that stranger hadn't been armed. I wonder if I'd be alive to tell this story. I never imagined that working nights at a hospital would alter my life the way it did. When I first applied, all I wanted was something reliable. I was 26, had just relocated to Millhaven, Indiana, after ending a relationship, and I barely had any savings. My cousin, a nurse at St. Vincent's Medical, mentioned the reception desk needed overnight clerks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and steady work meant security. I convinced myself it would only be for a year, maybe 2, until I figured out what I truly wanted. The first few months weren't unbearable. Nights in a hospital can be unpredictable, though not like the TV dramas. Some evenings were almost eerily quiet. Only a few patients coming in or family members dozing in waiting room chairs. Other nights, it felt like every ambulance in the county arrived at once. The most difficult part wasn't the blood or the drunken outbursts from patients. The worst part was the silence. Those long stretches of 2 or 3 in the morning when the world outside seemed frozen and you sat under buzzing fluorescent lights with only the hum of vending machines and the occasional cough echoing down the corridor. That was when I grew closer to my coworker, Aaron. He was around my age, maybe slightly older. Slim frame, always in a hoodie no matter the temperature. He'd been at the hospital longer than me, so he knew all the ins and outs. At first he was easy to chat with. We'd pass the time talking about movies or he'd share strange stories about past patients. But after about a month, he asked me out. It wasn't dramatic, just one slow night when the lobby was empty. He leaned back and said, "Hey, want to grab breakfast after shift? There's a diner on Elm that's decent." I remember hesitating before forcing a smile. "Thanks, but I don't mix work with that." He nodded quickly, almost too quick. "Yeah, no problem. Just thought I'd ask." I thought that was the end, but the air between us shifted. He wasn't openly hostile, didn't glare, didn't say anything cruel, but small things started stacking up. He stopped joking around with me. His answers became clipped, short. Sometimes I'd walk into the break room and he'd go silent mid-conversation. Not enough to file a complaint, not enough to quit, but enough to weigh down those long nights. The night, what I now call the night, started slowly. It was a Wednesday in February, and Millhaven winters were the kind that cut through coats no matter how tightly zipped. The parking lot still had frozen patches where snow never melted. I remember blowing into my hands, wishing I'd brought warmer gloves. Inside, the waiting room had only 3 people. A woman in her 50s flipping a magazine, a younger man curled in a chair with his hood pulled low, and an exhausted father with a small boy wrapped in a blanket. The muted TV above the counter showed local news. I sat behind the desk sipping weak break room coffee. Aaron was already logged into his computer. He barely looked at me when I sat down. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he muttered, not looking up. We worked quietly. Around 2 a.m., Aaron stood, stretched, and said, "Taking my break." "All right," I replied, still working through check-in forms. Breaks lasted half an hour, staggered so one of us was always at the desk. I thought nothing of it. I organized some files, wiped down the counter and grabbed another coffee. Patients trickled in. A man with chest pain, a woman with a sprained ankle, routine cases. I glanced at the security monitors as I always did when things slowed down. The screens showed hallways, the ER entrance, parts of the lot. Everything looked normal. Aaron returned right on time. He sat without a word, hoodie zipped high, hands stuffed into his pockets. The rest of the shift crawled uneventfully. By 7 a.m. I clocked out, grabbed my bag and braced for the freezing air. Aaron had already left at 4, as he usually did if the workload was light. The staff parking lot sat far from the main entrance, since closer spaces were reserved for visitors. The lot was quiet, yellow lights buzzing, shadows stretched across icy pavement. My stomach knotted as I walked. Same route I always took, Same empty lot, but something felt wrong, like someone was there. I tried to ignore it, tugged my coat tighter and quickened my steps. By the time I slid into my car and locked the doors, my hands were shaking. "Pull it together," I muttered, starting the engine. The drive home was only 15 minutes, but it dragged. At every red light, I checked the rearview mirror. The roads behind me were empty, yet the unease clung to me like smoke. Pulling into my driveway, the neighborhood was silent, porch light flickering, bag slung over my shoulder. I noticed my front door lock. It wasn't broken, but it felt wrong, loose, as if tampered with. My heart pounded. I stood outside a full minute, debating if I should go in. Finally, I forced myself inside. The place looked fine. Laptop still on the kitchen table, TV where I'd left it. I checked every room, every closet, even under the bed. Nothing. I told myself I was paranoid, but sleep never came easy. Every creak of the floor made me sit up listening. When I finally dragged myself from bed later that morning, the first thing I saw turned my stomach. Footprints, dirty prints across the hardwood starting at the front door and leading into the hall, stopping near my bedroom. I always removed my shoes at the door. These weren't mine. I called the police. The officer who arrived was calm, professional, asking the routine questions. Did anyone else have a key? Was anything missing? Did I have cameras? I said no, but my neighbor did. He went next door, came back 15 minutes later. "We've got something," he said. We watched the footage on my neighbor's phone. Grainy, but clear enough. A man walked up to my door in the middle of the night, used something thin on the lock and let himself in. He stayed for nearly an hour. When he walked back out, his hood slipped just enough for me to see his face. It was Aaron. Police arrested him later that day. He'd been inside while I slept. I resigned from the hospital a week later. Even knowing he was behind bars, I couldn't shake the sense of eyes on me. Couldn't relax in that house. I moved 3 months later. New job, new city. Yet even now, years on, I can't park in a dark lot without looking over my shoulder. Can't hear footsteps without my chest tightening. I keep 3 locks on my doors and cameras on every corner. And some nights, when the house falls still, I wake certain someone is inside, listening, waiting. I was 20 when I landed a late-night job at a small family-run diner in Ashwood. It wasn't anything flashy. The building sat wedged between an old laundromat and a hardware store, its neon signs buzzing faintly with a glowing open that stayed on until midnight. I was in college, balancing classes during the day and night shifts just to scrape together rent for a rundown 1-bedroom I shared with a roommate. My parents couldn't offer financial help, so when my mom's friend, Mr. Callahan, who owned the diner, offered me the evening spot, I accepted immediately. At first, I figured it would be easy money. The dining area closed at 9, so after that we only handled deliveries and the occasional takeout order. Most of our customers were night shift workers, truck drivers, or stragglers wandering in late. Orders trickled to nothing after 10, and the silence could feel unbearable. The delivery driver was Mr. Callahan's son, Tyler. He was 17, still in high school, and I hadn't met him before since he'd lived with his mother in another town most of his life. From the first shift, something about him got under my skin. He was arrogant, always steering conversation back to himself, always trying to outdo whatever you said. If I mentioned being tired after a day of lectures, Tyler would grin and claim he only needed 4 hours of sleep because he was built differently. If I said I went to the gym, he'd dive into some tale about how he used to box but quit because he was too powerful and no one wanted to fight him. He told these stories with absolute conviction, pacing as he spoke, sometimes jabbing the air like he was shadowboxing. Most nights I'd just tune him out, nodding occasionally to make it seem like I was listening. Inside, though, I wanted to tell him to shut up. I didn't like him at all, but I needed the job, so I let it slide. One particularly slow night in October, the diner was lifeless. The faint odor of fryer oil hung in the kitchen, and the hum of the soda machine seemed louder than any conversation. Tyler leaned on the counter, bragging about a fight he'd gotten into at school. "Guy swung at me," he said, puffing out his chest. I dropped him with one punch. When he tried to get up, I kicked him in the ribs. He stayed down after that. He laughed like it was a highlight reel. I forced a smile and muttered, "Sounds rough." He tilted his head, eyeing me. "You ever been in a fight?" I shook my head. "Didn't think so." He smirked. The way he said it made me feel like he was labeling me weak. I let it go, but it stung. Most nights followed the same script. Me prepping food, answering calls and wiping counters while Tyler either left on deliveries or paced around bragging. The worst nights were when no deliveries came through, because then he hovered nearby, restless, dumping his ego on me. One evening, he leaned in too close. "You know, most people respect me. They know I can handle myself. Not a lot of guys would dare mess with me." "Yeah," I muttered while stocking cups. "You don't believe me?" he pressed. I shrugged. "Sure I do." His eyes narrowed. "You better." Then, one night in late November, things spiraled. It was only us in the diner. No customers, no deliveries, just silence, and Tyler's endless boasting. He twirled a butter knife in his hand, saying, "I got enemies, man. People hate me, but they won't touch me. They're scared." I was exhausted, burned out from classes, work, and mostly from him. My patience broke. I muttered, "Yeah, you're real tough, Tyler." He froze, jaw tight. He stepped closer. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I replied flatly, just agreeing, but the damage was done. He shoved me. Caught off guard, I stumbled, then shoved him back harder. He staggered, wide-eyed, then he swung. His fist grazed my cheek, more shocking than painful. My heart raced, and without thinking, I slapped him across the face. He grabbed his jaw, trembling with rage rather than pain. That's when he snatched a chef's knife from the counter. The blade glinted as his shaking hand pointed it at me. "You think you're tough?" His voice cracked. My chest tightened. "Tyler, put it down," I said, backing away. But instead he lunged. I bolted into the dining area, weaving between tables as he chased me, knife in hand, sneakers squeaking on the tile. I shoved a chair behind me. It clattered loudly, but he was still on me, too close. Then the front door opened. A man in his 40s stepped inside and froze. There I was, backing away, with Tyler clutching a knife, panting like a madman. Tyler froze, face drained of color. He glanced at the knife, then at the customer, then at me. The man raised his hands. Should I call the cops?" Tyler's hand shook violently. For a terrifying second, I thought he'd stab me anyway. Then slowly, he dropped the knife. It hit the floor with a sharp clatter. Without a word, he stormed into the back. The customer eyed me. "You all right, kid?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm fine." He frowned at the knife. "You sure?" "Please," I said, "no cops." He hesitated but left, muttering about not getting involved. I stood in the empty diner, hands trembling as adrenaline drained into exhaustion. I worked the rest of my shift silently, avoiding Tyler, who never re-emerged. When I got home, I sat on my bed for hours, staring blankly. My cheek throbbed, but what haunted me was the look in his eyes when he held that blade. The next morning, I called Mr. Callahan and quit. I didn't explain, and he didn't ask. Maybe he already knew. I never went back. Years later, I bumped into someone who had worked there too. Hesitantly, I asked about Tyler. They said he'd dropped out of school, got into fights, and eventually moved out of state. Nobody seemed to know what became of him after that. I didn't ask further. Some people aren't worth keeping track of. For me, that night was enough. The image of him, knife in hand, rage in his eyes, that has stayed with me. And I thank God every day that customer walked through the door. Because if he hadn't, I'm not sure I'd be alive to tell this story. I was 21 during the summer of 2019, and at the time I worked at a place called Coral Wave Car Wash in Daneberry County, Florida. I wasn't in college then. Honestly, I wanted to go, but money was tight and financial aid never seemed to land my way. So I bounced between whatever jobs I could find. Restaurants, short seasonal retail shifts. But that year I wound up at the car wash. The wages weren't anything special, but the consistency mattered, and I needed steady income to pay rent for my modest apartment in Seabreeze. My boss, Curtis, was the kind of leathery, sunburned Florida man who always looked like he'd rather be somewhere else. He wasn't exactly pleasant, but he wasn't unbearable either. He cared more about spotless cars than the workers cleaning them. Still, he scheduled me reliably and paid on time, so I put up with him. Most of my coworkers were decent people, a blend of college students, high school grads like myself, and a couple of older guys simply scraping by. I got along with nearly everyone. Nearly. The one exception was a guy named Tyler Mason, who had started there in January. He was 25, only a few years older than me. At first he seemed completely ordinary. He was polite, shook hands firmly, and even cracked jokes during his first week that had everyone laughing. I remember thinking, finally someone I can chat with on those long, dragging afternoons. For the first several weeks he came across as harmless. He asked me about weekend plans, took interest in the bands I liked, even suggested I follow him on Instagram. I didn't think twice. Everyone at the wash followed each other. It felt like part of our little circle. But by March, something changed. It began subtly. Tyler would brush against me when it wasn't necessary. He'd place a hand on my shoulder and hold it a second too long. When I passed him towels, his fingers lingered against mine. At first, I laughed it off, thinking maybe I was imagining it. But soon it became clear he was doing it deliberately. One afternoon, while I was refilling soap solution, he came up behind me and muttered, "You smell really good. What cologne is that?" I stepped away quickly and said, Just deodorant." He smirked. "Whatever it is, it's working." I didn't laugh. That night, my phone lit up with Instagram messages from him. "Tyler, we should hang out. Tyler, wanna grab dinner? Tyler, you're too cute to be single." My responses were always the same. "I'm not interested. I want to keep things professional." But he never let up. By April, I was starting to feel unsafe at work. I dreaded sharing shifts with him, but Curtis brushed me off when I asked to switch days. I remember pulling Curtis aside after Tyler accidentally brushed my hip. "Curtis, I need to talk about Tyler," I said. He sighed without even looking at me. "What now?" I told him. "He keeps bothering me, touching me, messaging outside of work. I feel uncomfortable." Curtis finally looked up, annoyed. "Look, you're an adult. Handle it yourself. I'm not your babysitter." I was stunned. "So you're not going to do anything?" He shook his head. "Unless he's messing up cars, I don't care. I don't have time for drama." That was when I realized I was on my own. My parents weren't much support either. They'd never been the affectionate type, and talking to them about personal issues felt like speaking to strangers. My friends were busy with school and jobs, and I didn't want to sound dramatic, so I kept quiet. Meanwhile, Tyler only got bolder. One evening in May, after my shift, I got home, showered, and threw on a bathrobe. My bedroom window faced the street, and stupidly, I had left the blinds half open. When I glanced that way, I froze. Under the pale yellow glow of the streetlight, there he was. Tyler, perched on a bicycle at the curb, staring straight at my window. My stomach dropped. My throat tightened. When our eyes met, he instantly pedaled off into the night. I stood trembling. How did he even know where I lived? I'd never told him, never mentioned my complex. That night, I blocked him everywhere. Instagram, Snapchat, even my phone number. I sent Curtis an email saying I was quitting because of Tyler's behavior. I thought that would end it. It didn't. By morning, I had dozens of new DMs on Instagram from an unfamiliar account. Blank profile picture. The messages were obvious. Unknown. Why won't you answer me? Unknown. You can't hide forever. Unknown. I just want to see you. Unknown. Why make this so hard? I knew immediately it was him. I blocked the account. Minutes later, another appeared, then another. By the second day, over 20 different accounts bombarded me, each spewing the same chilling lines. He even made fresh Snapchat usernames. It was relentless, so I shut down my social media entirely. But it still didn't stop. That Friday night around 10:30, there was a knock at my front door. I froze, heart hammering. I crept to the peephole. It was Tyler. He stood in a gray hoodie, shifting nervously, eyes darting around. I stayed silent. Then the knocking grew louder. "Open the door," he called, his muffled voice sharp. "We need to talk." I backed away, shaking. He pounded harder. "I'm not leaving. If you don't open up, we're going to have a problem." That was it. I snapped. I shouted through the door. "My dad has a gun. Leave now or I'll call the police." My hands shook as I dialed 911. The operator's calm tone steadied me. "Stay on the line. Officers are on the way. Don't open the door." I crouched on the living room floor, whispering details, clutching the phone. Within 10 minutes, red and blue lights lit up my window. Tyler bolted, but officers arrived in time to catch him biking away. 3 came inside, and I told them everything from the workplace harassment to the stalking online to him showing up at my door. They nodded firmly. "We'll handle it." That night, they warned him to leave me alone. Naively, I thought that was the end. But the very next morning, he was back. This time, the police caught him pedaling toward my complex. He was arrested immediately. Later, I learned the chilling truth during interrogation. He admitted he had come by my apartment multiple times over the past 2 months. He had printed screenshots of my old photos. He claimed he just wanted to be close to me. Hearing that broke me. How many nights had he been outside my window without me knowing? How long had he been feeding this obsession? Prosecutors filed charges, felony burglary and misdemeanor stalking. He could serve up to 15 years. It's been years since then, but I still wake sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced someone is outside my window. I wonder if prison will change him. I wonder if when he gets out, he'll remember my face and start again. I just hope I'm wrong.